we've all heard the joke. You know the one?
The apocalypse joke.
Exactly. Long after humanity is gone, long after the dust settles from whatever apocalyptic event finally does us in, the only things left wandering the barren wasteland of Earth will be the cockroaches.
Right.
It's this incredibly persistent pop culture myth.
Right.
I mean, we look at a cockroach scurrying across the kitchen floor, and we imagine it as this ancient, indestructible survivor, an insect that has supposedly remained completely unchanged since the literal dawn of time.
Mm-hmm.
You have probably pictured them surviving asteroid strikes, wandering through the feet of dinosaurs and looking exactly like they do right now. But the truth about the cockroach's family tree is far more bizarre, significantly more giant, and honestly a lot more fascinating than the static myth we've all bought into.
We do have a tendency to flatten millions of years of evolutionary history into these very simple, bite-sized narratives.
Yeah.
The idea of the unchanging ancient cockroach is arguably one of the most stubborn myths in biology. But when you dive into the actual fossil record, you don't find a static creature frozen in time.
No, not at all.
You find a story of incredible dynamic transformation, strange physical adaptations, and deeply surprising evolutionary cousins. And in a world of information overload, taking the time to understand the true evolutionary history of these creatures offers a perfect lesson in why we must always question our basic assumptions.
Absolutely.
It really forces us to look closer at the things we think we already know perfectly well.
And that is the mission of today's deep dive.
Right.
We're jumping into a fascinating synthesis of paleontological research from our source material, specifically a really detailed Wikipedia article focused on an extinct group of insects known as roachoids.
Yes.
We're going to completely dismantle that ancient cockroach myth for you. We're going to uncover their giant sword-carrying ancestors and trace a family tree that will permanently change how you look at the bugs in your own backyard.
I'm excited.
Because every time I think I have a handle on how evolution works, a lineage like this completely flips the script.
The fossil record of these early insect forms, it acts as a window into an entirely different ecological world. The roachoids are the perfect guides through that ancient leaf litter, showing us how life actually adapts when the planet undergoes massive structural changes over millions of years.
Okay, let's unpack this. What exactly is a roachoid? Because if you're reading up on this, you might see them referred to in different ways depending on where you look.
Right. The terminology can be a bit dense.
Yeah, sometimes they're called roachids or blatoids or even Eoblatidea. But for our purposes, we're going to stick with the term roachoids.
That works perfectly.
And when we talk about these creatures, we have to clear our minds of the bugs hiding under the refrigerator today, even if they share a passing resemblance.
Exactly. To visualize the roachoid, you have to picture something that feels familiar at first glance, but reveals fundamental anatomical differences upon closer inspection. If you were looking at a fossilized roachoid, your brain would immediately register the general cockroach-like build. They possessed a large, disc-like structure called a pronotum.
That's the armor plate, right? The shield that covers the top of the head and thorax, giving that classic hunched look.
Precisely. They had that distinct pronotum covering most of the head, paired with long antennae sweeping around to sense their environment.
Okay.
Their bodies were heavily flattened, which is an adaptation perfect for squeezing through tight spaces in the dense underbrush. And their legs were structurally built for rapid running.
So they were fast.
Very fast. Startle a roachoid, and it would sprint away into the prehistoric ferns just as quickly as a modern roach darts under a cabinet. But where paleontologists really focus their attention, where real science happens, is on the wings.
The wings, right.
They had heavy, distinct dimension, and specifically a highly characteristic arched vein called the cup vein.
Let's talk about that cup vein for a second, because that feels like one of those tiny details that unlocks a much bigger story. It isn't just a random line on a wing.
No, it acts as an evolutionary fingerprint. Insect wings are incredibly delicate in life, but their venation patterns are remarkably durable in the fossil record.
Fascinating.
This specific arched cup vein gives the wing a distinct aerodynamic and structural profile. It likely added rigidity for an insect that spends most of its time scurrying under heavy, abrasive leaf litter rather than flying high in the canopy.
That makes a lot of sense.
Paleontologists use that specific vein structure to trace the roachoid lineage through different geological strata because it is incredibly typical of both roachoids and the wings of modern cockroaches.
So they looked the part, and they clearly acted the part, operating as swift litter inhabitants. They were scurrying through the dead plant and animal matter on the forest floor, acting as the essential cleanup crew of the ancient world.
Yes.
But to really set the scene, we need to talk about the environment they were living in, because we're starting way back in the Carboniferous period.
You completely different Earth.
Yeah. This was a time when the earth forests were dominated by massive, towering club mosses and ferns, and the atmosphere was supercharged with oxygen. And in that environment, things were just built on a different scale.
The scale is where the comparison to modern roaches really fractures. The Carboniferous period is famous for its giant arthropods, and the roachoids were absolutely no exception.
Not at all.
While many were modestly sized, some reached proportions that would be quite alarming to encounter today. We have fossil evidence of species like Progonoblatina, which also appears in the literature under the name Arcoblatina beecheri, and another robust species called Nessimilacris.
And how big are we talking?
These specimens reached about 9 centimeters in total length.
9 centimeters.
Yeah.
Which is about 3.5 inches. I saw those measurements in the source material and honestly had to double-check to make sure it wasn't a typo.
It is remarkably large.
You are talking about a heavily armored, running insect the size of a computer mouse. Picture that bolting across the forest floor. It completely changes the predator-prey dynamic of that ecosystem.
It was a very different world. And we also have to factor in species like Opsiomolacris.
Oh, right, the wings on that one.
Yes, the fossil records for this specific roachoid show wings reaching 7.5 centimeters long. That wing length actually rivals the absolute largest modern cockroach we have on Earth today, which is Megaloblatta longipennis.
So these Carboniferous roachoids were pushing the absolute biological limits of that specific body plan. They were the undisputed giants of the undergrowth.
Exactly.
So you had these massive, fast, armored insects navigating the Paleozoic era. They have the pronotum, the flat bodies, the running legs. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
If they look so much like roaches and fulfill the exact same ecological niche as roaches, why do paleontologists draw such a hard line? Why aren't they just classified as early cockroaches?
That's the core question.
The answer all comes down to their reproductive strategy.
The reproductive anatomy is the defining line in the sand. This is where the roachoid diverges drastically from any modern cockroach. Female roachoids possessed a well-developed external ovipositor.
Which is essentially a biological sword attached to the abdomen.
That is a very apt way to describe it. An ovipositor is an anatomical tube, quite long and rigid in these primitive insects, extending from the rear of the abdomen.
And what did they do with it?
Female roachoids use this specialized appendage to physically penetrate the substrate. They would literally inject their individual eggs directly into the dirt or deep into rotting wood, laying them one by one.
Which is a completely alien concept if you know anything about how modern cockroaches operate. They don't have biological swords. They leave behind those highly distinct little hardened packages.
Those packages are called ootheca. An ootheca is a complex, hardened egg pod.
Like a little purse.
Yes. Think of it as a portable biological fortress that contains multiple eggs safely sealed inside a protein-based casing. Modern cockroaches either drop this protective pod in a highly secure hidden crevice or, depending on the species, carry it around attached to their abdomen until the eggs are completely ready to hatch.
And the roachoids were just out there sticking naked eggs into the mud.
Pretty much.
If that ovipositor strategy worked for them for millions of years, and it clearly did, given how wildly successful they were in the Carboniferous, why would they ever need to evolve the oothecapod in the first place?
That transition represents what evolutionary biologists call a synapomorphy.
A synapomorphy.
Yes, a synapomorphy is a new shared evolutionary trait that definitively separates a specific group of organisms from their more primitive ancestors. The shift from laying naked, vulnerable eggs in the dirt with an ovipositor to producing a highly protective, portable egg case is a monumental evolutionary milestone.
Because it protects them so much better.
Exactly. It represents a fundamental upgrade in how these animals protected their next generation. An ootheca shields the embryos from microscopic predators, from fungal infections, from parasitic wasps, and crucially, from drying out as global climates began to shift.
It makes total sense. They upgraded their evolutionary strategy from just having a robust physical defense for the adult insect to extending that armor over their unborn offspring.
Beautifully put.
So what does this all mean for their place on the tree of life? If these giant ovipositor-wielding insects aren't true cockroaches, what exactly is their relationship to the bugs we see today? Because for the longest time, the shorthand in the literature was just to label them Paleozoic cockroaches.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at how modern taxonomists construct evolutionary relationships. The label Paleozoic cockroaches is a misnomer that obscures the true complexity of their lineage. Rochoids are classified as a paraphyletic group.
Which basically means they represent a grouping of primitive relatives, but that grouping doesn't include all the modern descendants that eventually sprang from that line.
Right.
It is like pointing at your great-grandparents and all their siblings in an old photograph, but explicitly leaving out all the modern kids and grandkids they produced.
That captures the concept perfectly. A paraphyletic group is a highly useful category for scientists to group these primitive, structurally similar ancient animals together, but it is not a clean single branch on the tree of life that leads straight to one modern animal.
Right, they're the base.
They are an assemblage of early relatives, and understanding that paraphyletic nature leads us to the most spectacular revelation about the rochoids.
This was the absolute aha moment for me. Get ready to completely rethink the insect world, because rochoids do not just lead to cockroaches. The fossils from these Paleozoic strata prove that rochoids belong to the stem group of a massive superorder called Dictyoptera.
The Dictyoptera. And the members of that modern superorder include not just the cockroaches we are familiar with, but also termites and, surprisingly, praying mantises.
Termites and praying mantises.
It's incredible.
The morphological jump there is just staggering. You look at a praying mantis, this elegant, upright, visual predator with those massive compound eyes and raptorial slicing forelegs, and then you look at a termite.
A very different creature.
A pale, blind, soft-bodied little bug that lives in massive colonies, chewing on the wood inside your walls. To realize that, evolutionarily speaking, both of these wildly different insects are highly specialized offshoots of these ancient giant rochoids. Well, it's hard to wrap your head around.
It really is.
Termites are essentially just highly social cockroaches that evolved a specialized gut biome to digest wood. And mantises are predatory cousins that stood up and evolved to hunt.
It completely shatters the myth of the unchanging cockroach. The rochoids were the primitive stock, the foundational blueprint.
Right.
From that relatively generalized, scurrying stem group, the tree of life radiated outward in incredibly diverse, highly specialized directions. To understand how that happened, we have to clarify the actual timeline, which puts the final nail in the coffin of the pop culture myth.
The dates are staggering. The rochoids, these primitive ovipositor-wielding ancestors, existed from the late Carboniferous all the way through the late Cretaceous period. They had an incredibly long run dominating the forest floor.
They did. But here is the critical distinction that debunks the myth. Modern cockroaches, the true Dictyopterans equipped with the Utica egg cases, did not even originate until much, much later.
Right.
The broader ancestors of the Dictyoptera group likely appeared sometime in the early Jurassic. And the earliest definitive fossils of modern cockroaches, they don't appear in the fossil record until the late Jurassic.
So, to map that out visually for you, you have the giant rochoids running around the Carboniferous. Millions and millions of years pass. We move through the Permian into the Triassic, and finally get deep into the Jurassic, the golden age of the classic dinosaurs like Stegosaurus and Brachiosaurus.
Yes.
It is only then that the actual true modern cockroaches finally step onto the evolutionary stage.
Yeah.
By the time a modern roach existed, its rochoid ancestors had already been walking the earth for tens of millions of years.
The modern cockroach is absolutely not a living fossil from the dawn of time. It is a highly derived, highly evolved Jurassic upgrade of a much older, significantly more primitive design.
But the story of the rochoids didn't just end the moment modern cockroaches showed up. This brings us to their final bizarre chapter, which takes place in the Cretaceous period.
A fascinating era.
The Cretaceous is the tail end of the age of dinosaurs, leading right up to the asteroid impact. By this time, the traditional old-school rochoids were becoming rare. The modern cockroaches with their superior Utica egg cases were likely outcompeting them on the ground. But some of these lingering rochoids managed to survive by taking their evolution in a radically different direction.
They adapted by fundamentally changing their morphology. We know the details of this final chapter thanks to extraordinary discoveries preserved in Burmese amber from Myanmar, which dates back roughly 100 million years.
Like a time capsule.
Exactly. This amber gives us pristine, three-dimensional snapshots of these late-stage rochoids. And what we find are species like Encephaloblatta and Proceroblatta.
When you look at the scans of these amber fossils from the source material, they look absolutely nothing like the giant, flat, running rochoids of the Carboniferous.
Not at all.
They strongly deviated from that classic ground-dwelling form. They evolved long legs, different body proportions, and actually grew to resemble modern tree crickets.
Yes.
Why would a lineage that spent tens of millions of years perfectly adapted to scurrying flat under dead leaves suddenly evolve to mimic a tree cricket?
What's fascinating here is how life responds to massive ecological shifts. Researchers attribute this drastic morphological shift to a monumental event in Earth's history known as the angiosperm terrestrial revolution.
Which is the sudden explosive evolution and global spread of flowering plants.
Correct. For the vast majority of Earth's history, terrestrial forests were dominated by gymnosperms, ferns, conifers, and cycads. But during the Cretaceous flowering plants, the angiosperms rapidly evolved and began to completely take over the terrestrial world.
And that changed everything.
It was not just a change in the type of plants, it completely transformed the physical architecture of the forest itself. Angiosperms created entirely new habitats, complex new layers of vertical canopy, broad leaves, and completely novel food sources.
The environment was literally blooming and structuring itself vertically in a way it never had before.
Exactly.
So these atypical long-tailed roachoids realize they can't compete with the new modern roaches down in the dirt. Instead of just accepting extinction, they adapt. They move vertically. They climb up into these new flowering plants and change their physical bodies to blend into that new 3D architecture.
Developing this tree cricket morphology as a direct response to the world changing around them.
It is a masterclass in evolutionary plasticity. They weren't static at all. They were actively shape-shifting to exploit brand new ecological niches.
It is a stunning example of evolutionary radiation. The roachoids were not simply waiting around in the leaf litter to go extinct. They were actively adapting to the new verticality created by the very first flowers. It proves how dynamic these ancient lineages truly were.
It is genuinely mind-blowing when you step back and look at the whole picture. Let's recap this journey because we have covered an immense stretch of Earth's history today.
We really have.
We started with that stubborn myth of the basic, indestructible, unchanging cockroach. We completely tore that down by introducing the true ancestors, the roachoids. These were 9-centimeter sword-laying giants sprinting through the hyper-oxygenated Carboniferous forests.
The undeniable rulers of the undergrowth.
We learned how they represent a vital paraphyletic stem group, branching off not just to modern roaches, but serving as the foundational blueprint for both termites and praying mantises.
Yes.
And finally, we saw how the last holdouts of this ancient family adapted to the sudden arrival of flowers by turning into tree cricket lookalikes, forever trapped in 100-million-year-old amber.
It perfectly illustrates why we must continually seek out multiple perspectives to enrich our understanding of the natural world. Nature's family tree is endlessly complex and deeply dynamic.
True.
By examining these long-extinct paraphyletic groups, we gain a much richer, multidimensional perspective of evolutionary biology. It shows us quite clearly that survival over deep time isn't about remaining unchanged. It is about constant, relentless adaptation to an ever-shifting environment.
I know I will certainly never look at a praying mantis or a termite or even a roach on the sidewalk the same way again. They are carrying this wild, shared, ancient legacy right in front of us.
This raises an important question, though, something for you to consider long after we wrap up this deep dive.
Oh, I like where this is going.
We discussed at length how modern cockroaches developed the ootheca, that hardened, portable egg case, while their giant, extinct roachoid cousins relied on inserting bare eggs into the ground with an ovipositor.
Right.
When you consider the cataclysmic environmental changes that occurred at the end of the Cretaceous period, when the asteroid hit and so much life on Earth was subsequently wiped out, could the evolution of that simple protective egg purse have been the ultimate evolutionary cheat code?
Wow.
Was that singular reproductive innovation the exact reason modern cockroaches survived the apocalypse, while their giant sword-laying ancestors faded forever into the fossil record?
Now that is a profound thought to explore on your own. Keep questioning your assumptions, keep learning, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.